Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 49. This Venerable One's Shizun is always angry. Chu Wanning's shock was beyond words. His eyes widened as he looked at Mo Ran in his dream as if he is seeing a ghost. Mo Weiyu has grown into a very handsome man, with broad shoulders, long legs and a head taller than him. When he looked down at himself, his eyes were tinged with playfulness and mockery. This Venerable One's good Shizun, you should really see what you look like now. His fingertips slid down Chu Wanning's cheeks and stopped in his ears, his eyes frosty. After a few moments of silence, he grunted, then leaned in. A soft, hot touch sweeping over him as he took Chu Wanning's lips. Chu Wanning was caught off guard. There was a thud in Chu Wanning's head, as if a string had broken. Mo Ran was kissing him. His breath was taking over him, moist, agitated, full of dirty, sinful desire. Lips and teeth entwined in a single place, chests turning over in waves. Chu Wanning is almost stunned, his phoenix eyes are wide open, in his mind is a mixture of anger and bewilderment, but in this dream world, it is as if he has lost his spiritual powers and can hardly muster even ordinary strength. He is unable to free himself from Mo Ran's grip and is firmly confined in his arms. The Mo Ran in the dream was somehow completely different from the one he knew. Instead of the usual deference and good-naturedness, he was aggressive and stern. He could even clearly perceive the warm breath of Mo Ran as he breathed, sharp and low. He reeked of power and lust like lava that would melt his flesh and bone into water. Chu Wanning's face turned blue, almost vomiting blood. He could never have imagined that he could be pinned down by Mo Ran without any resistance, and what was even more unacceptable was that he felt his blood flowing and his fingertips getting weak in the midst of this fiery kiss and entanglement. He shivered in Mo Ran's arms. His chest was so hot it seemed to melt away the ice and snow. He tried to struggle, but he had no strength. By the end of the kiss, Chu Wanning's entire body was weak, and Mo Ran held him, turning his face sideways and pressing it against the back of his ear. His breath sprayed on the base of his ear, thick and passionate. Then he heard Mo Ran say, "I thought you wanted to make a deal with this Venerable One." Mo Ran's voice is hoarse, so hoarse that it is almost alien to Chu Wanning. Chu Wanning lowered his eyes and saw his Adam's apple rolling. It was a forbearing, but fast, swallowing motion. "You have no more value to this Venerable One, so let's talk about the last thing you have left." Chu Wanning's voice was also muffled, whether from desire or anger is undetermined. He whispered, "What?" Mo Ran pushed him against the wall and suddenly raised his hand, slamming it against the wall and grabbing Chu Wanning hard by one wrist that was held in chains. Without malice, yet without apathy, he bent his head close to his ear. Chu Wanning shivered violently all of a sudden, a terrible numbness rushed from his tailbone up to his scalp. Mo Ran's voice is low and his breathing is muddy and heavy. "You let me come once, and I will agree to your request." Chu Wanning's eyes widened with a watery tinge of lust, but more than that, they were disbelieving. When Mo Ran said these words, it was full of intimidation and perversion. His breath was on the side of Chu Wanning's neck, with a gentle tone and malicious intent. However, this Venerable One hates Shizun so much, and I probably don't have much interest in Shizun's face. To satisfy me, you would have to work harder. Mo Ran paused and continued to act recklessly, holding him from the front tighter. "So you think it through. Once you decide, you can kneel in front of me and beg me nicely, coaxing me to satisfaction. You'd have to humble yourself, crawling to me like a dog. Surrender to me and beg me to look at you." Chu Wanning is going crazy. Elder Yu Heng is proud of his purity and innocence, and does not get involved with men or women, does not look at erotic pictures, does not listen to suggestive songs, and is chaste and self-absorbed. To put it simply, he knew very little about carnal affairs. So, he was very unfortunate. Although he was furious, he could only throw away his helmet and abandon his armor before such a fierce strange feeling as he got defeated. Moran finished speaking and waited a moment. When he did not respond, he cursed, but pressed on and began to kiss him again, kissing him long and hard on the lips, his heavy breath spraying against his ear again, his cheek rubbing against his sideburns, and then lowering his head to nibble hard on his bloody flesh, as if he hated it desperately but also as if he was extremely thirsty. What makes Chu Wanning's skin crawl even more is the fact that even though Moran's words are rough, but when he tortured him, imprisoned him, complained and said to him harshly, "What are you pretending to be? A gentleman? Pretending to be a saint?" When he looked up at him, his eyes were really searing and feverish, with a wonderful light at the end. As if the hatred that had been accumulated for a long time was finally vented. It is also like the lustful lava that boils beneath the rock, spilling out at will after a long period of seclusion. Chu Wanning looks as if he has been scalded by his wolf-like gaze and tries to look away, but Moran reads his mind and pinches his face. "Look at me." The raspy voice rolled and shook slightly, whether from excitement or something else. It sounded like the hunger and thirst of a wild animal pouncing on its food. "I told you to look only at me." Chu Wanning shuddered and closed his eyes. This dream is really absurd. "Shizun." The voice by his ear suddenly became soft and mellow again, in a more familiar tone, "Shizun, wake up." In a blur, Chu Wanning saw Moran's face in front of him and without thinking, he slapped him across the cheek, sharp and hard. Moran was caught off guard and stand straight up, and widened his eyes. "Shizun, what are you beating me for?" Chu Wanning sat up, his phoenix eyes hooded and filled with anger and fright. His body is still trembling slightly as dreams and reality intertwined, driving him mad. "Shizun, don't come any closer." Chu Wanning lowered his eyebrows and shouted sharply. Moran was startled by his extreme reaction. After a long while, he cautiously said, "Did you have a nightmare?" "Nightmare? Yes, it's a dream, it's just a dream." Chu Wanning stared at the person in front of him blankly and took a few moments to come back to his senses. He is still lying in the library of the Red Lotus Pavilion, the Loyalty Palace, and the man, Moran, had disappeared altogether. All that remains in front of him is the face that is still young and childish. "Well, in my dreams, I was slapping somebody." Finally awake, Chu Wanning paused for a moment to compose his expression and, with long, thin fingers that still trembled slightly, he fussed to straighten his lapel, suppressing the unresolved fever and unease. Moran rubbed his flushed cheeks and gasped, "What nightmare did Shizun have? You hit so hard." A trace of embarrassment flashed across Chu Wanning's face. He pursed his lips and turned half his handsome face sideways, keeping his mouth shut. His face was unruffled, but inside he felt his pride shattering. He actually had that kind of absurd dream, so filthy and unethical. What a shameful master he is. What broke him even more was the fact that his body responded to this humiliating. Fortunately, the robes are loose and flowing, so that no one can see them. But Chu Wanning held the corner of his forehead, his face still as dark as the bottom of a cooking pot. Naturally, he could not take it out on the Moran inside his dream, but he could take it out on the one who came to him. So, with a tilted eyebrow, he asked, "Barging into my bedroom in the middle of the night, do you think the Red Lotus Pavilion is your home?" After being slapped in the face for no apparent reason, Moran was aggrieved and whispered, "What's with the tantrums?" Chu Wanning's eyebrows rose in anger. "I'm not mad, I'm going to bed, get out of here." Moran said, "But Shizun, it's Jinchi now." Chu Wanning: "If we hadn't already waited for ages at the platform of sin and virtue and not seen Shizun, I wouldn't have dared to come to the Red Lotus Pavilion to look for you without permission." Chu Wanning: "The window of the Red Lotus Pavilion library was hidden, so he pushed it open and saw that the sun had indeed risen high and the birds were singing." Chu Wanning's face got even harder. It looked like he might summon Tianwen to whip someone at any moment. The realization that he had been dreaming until mid-morning and would have continued to do so if Mo Ran hadn't come to call him, made Chu Wanning's forehead throb and his knuckles turn the color of jade as he squeezed the window pane. Chu Wanning's spiritual practice has always been good at suppressing desire, and before this, he had never even had an erotic dream, let alone such a disturbing one. In this way, Chu Wanning is like a wooden man, straight, dumb, and rigid. He has cultivated his own mental method to the perfect state, cutting off desire. He had nothing but despise against couples who need to practice double cultivation. Compared to them, he feels that he was superior and particularly noble. Who would have expected that the horse would stumble and fall? And it was at the hands of his own young disciple. The noble and cool Master Chu, the Baidu immortal, no longer dared to look at Mo Ran, and angrily said, "Come with me to the platform of sin." And virtue for morning training and waved his sleeves away. Xuemeng and Shimei had been waiting for a long time and were sitting in the shade talking to each other when Chu Wanning arrived. Shimei was very anxious. "Shizun is never late, what's the matter with him today? It's already this time of day and he's still not in sight." Xuemeng was even more anxious. "Didn't Mo Ran went to check on Shizun? Why isn't he back yet? Shizun is not sick, is he?" Shimei said, "I see that the wound on Shizun's shoulder is really bad. Although Shizun is well trained, his body is weak. In fact, it is difficult to say if." When Xuemeng heard this, he became more and more restless and suddenly got up. "I can wait any more. Mo Ran, that unreliable dog. I'll go and see for myself." When he turned around, he saw Chu Wanning striding in, dressed in white. The two men under the tree said in unison, "Shizun." Chu Wanning explained, "Some things have delayed me. Let us go and start your practice for the day." Taking advantage of Chu Wanning's inattentiveness, Shimei whispered to Mo Ran, who was following behind, "What's the matter with Shizun? What's the delay about?" Mo Ran rolled his eyes. "He overslept." "Ah. Shh, pretend you don't know." Mo Ran rubbed his cheek. The slap from earlier still sting and he didn't want to be slapped by Chu Wanning again. Shimei's eyelashes flutter. "Why is the left side of your face red?" Mo Ran whispered, "If you keep asking, the right side of my face will have to turn red as well. So stop asking and let's get out of here." When the three of them arrived at the training ground, Chu Wanning sent Mo Ran and Shimei off to spar on their own, leaving Xuemeng alone. Chu Wanning said, "Sit down." Xuemeng was not sure what to make of it, but he had always followed his Shizun's orders and immediately sat down on the floor as he had been told. Chu Wanning also sat down in front of him and said to him, "In 3 years' time it will be the Lingshan sword discussion, what are your plans?" Xuemeng lowered his eyes for a moment before gritting her teeth and saying, "Take the top spot." If Chu Wanning asked him this way before his trip to Jinchinj Lake, Xuemeng would have answered more proudly and self-assured. However, at this moment, when he said again, he could hold on hardly to his pride and not let it go. He was not without self-awareness, but he was not willing to give up his title as the darling son of the heaven. After saying the words top spot, Xuemeng was anxious and piqued at Chu Wanning. But Chu Wanning just looked at him, without the slightest mockery or question. He said only one word, simply and sharply, "Good." Xuemeng's eyes lit up at once. "Shizun, do you think I can still?" He said in a moment of excitement, making him a bit incoherent. Chu Wanning said, "Under my guidance, there is no disciple who gives up before the fight. Shizun. Those who participate in the Lingshan sword discussion are the best young men from all sects. Those without holy weapon will be no match for you, and you should not be afraid of those who have them." Chu Wanning said, "Holy weapon is not something that can be mastered overnight, but your sword, Long Cheng, though slightly inferior, is of the highest quality that can be forged in the mortal world. If you train hard and make good use of it over the past 3 years, it is not impossible to get the top place. Chu Zongxi is known to have a keen eye for martial arts and a great deal of insight. Xuemeng was heartened by his words, as he was a man who would never tell a good lie in order to inspire others. Is this true, Shizun? Chu Wanning looked him the eyes and said gently, Xuemeng, how old are you? People who are not past 5 years old, I don't bother with, yes. When he said this, Xuemeng was a little embarrassed, rubbed his nose, and laughed. Chu Wanning said again, the outcome is not yet decided, but pride cannot be underestimated. Work hard for it. As for the result, you don't have to think about it too much. Xuemeng said, yes. After that, Xuemeng felt relieved. Chu Wanning came to the back of the practice ground near the spiritual wooden piles. To prevent the disciples from injuring others when hitting the piles, this place was built in a somewhat remote area, and it was necessary to walk through a long corridor and turn a corner to reach the piles. Shi Mei and Mo Ran had their backs to him and were talking, not too far away, just close enough to be heard. Chu Wanning was about to call them over, but the scene before him made him shut his mouth abruptly. End chapter. Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 50. This venerable one likes you. As a person who cherishes weapons, this kind of situation made Chu Wanning so angry he couldn't even speak. He was afraid he saw a Moran. Not far away under the flower tree, Moran summoned Jiangui. A holy weapon can expand and contract by itself and control its size, but most people would prefer to make their weapons bigger to make it look more imposing or at least keep their normal appearance like Chu Wanning does. Moran, however, made Jiangui very small, about the same length and thickness as the headband of the hair. With its delicate broken leaves, the exquisite godly weapon looked like a little poor child. Everyone has different spiritual powers. Chu Wanning's Tianwen is golden when infused with his spiritual power, but Jiangui is red. So, leaving out the willow leaves aside, Jiangui looked like the Yuelao red line. Shi Mei, you tie this to your hand. I want to know if Jiangui has the ability to coax people to tell the truth like Tianwen. You want to try it with me? Shi Mei asked. Moran smiled and said, yes, because I'm best friends with you, and I believe you will never lie to me. Shi Mei still hesitated, that's true, but I will never ask tricky things. If you don't believe me, let's make a pinky promise. Moran said, holding out his little finger. Shi Mei don't know whether to laugh or cry. How old you are that you are still this childish? If you can do it when you're 8 years old, you can still do it at 18, Moran said, grinning and giggling as he took Shi Mei's right hand and wrenched out his little finger. Shi Mei was amused, so he just decided to humor Moran. Moran caught Shi Mei's little finger, but instead of making the pinky promise, he narrowed his eyes and smiled. Jiangui, let's get to work. With 2 swishes, one end of Jiangui was tied in Shi Mei's little finger and the other end was attached to Moran's still standing little finger. The handsome young man smiled with deep dimples like a sly fox who has ascended to heaven and said gleefully, congratulations, you have been tricked. Shi Mei simply cried out in disbelief, you untie me. There's no rush. Moran smiled, I'll just ask a few questions and let you go. Moran has been a little uneasy ever since Shi Mei failed to open the ever-yearning box back in Jinqing Lake. Although Shi Mei was wearing gloves and could not touch the ever-yearning box directly, Moran still couldn't let go of it, not to mention that the box was opened by Chu Wanning in the end. Chu Wanning? How is that possible? Moran thought that the ever-yearning box must be broken. But in order to confirm this, he thinks it is best to use Jiangui to confirm. Again. He has no doubt about his feelings for Shi Mei, but he is worried that in Shi Mei's mind, he doesn't matter at all. As for Ji Beiwa's comment back in Jinqing Lake, it could be a mistake. He thinks a lot of Shimei, who has a gentle temperament and is always nice to everyone. Unlike Chu Wanning, who puts on a face like everyone owes him a lot of money and was particularly disliked. Don't look how Taxian Jun was a rough man, but when he's thinking about his sweetheart, he can get himself all tangled up to death. First of all, Mo-ran was jittery but still smiling, pretending to be relaxed and casual, and decided to deliberately throw in a few casual questions to set the scene. What do you think of Xue Meng? With the pain in her finger, Shimei couldn't help but be honest. Young master is very nice, but he is too straightforward and sometimes unbearable. Mo-ran stroked his palm and laughed, ha. There are times when even you can't stand him, ha ha ha. No wonder, after all he is so annoying. Shimei blushed. Keep your voice down so the young master doesn't hear you. Fine, fine. Mo-ran laughed, but I'm especially happy when you say bad things about him. Shimei. Mo-ran asked again, then what do you think of Shizun? Shizun is very good, but he has a temperament. It seemed that Shimei didn't want to comment on Chu Wanning very much, but he was helplessly bound by Jiangui, so he bit his lip for a while, and still said aggrievedly, and a bit grumpy. Haha, what do you mean a bit? He is very cranky, he gets angry every now and then, and refuses to admit it when he's angry. I think it's better to serve the noble consort than him. Chu Wanning, who's standing in the corner. Mo-ran suddenly became a little curious and asked, then if you know that Shizun has a bad temper, why do you still follow him? Shimei said, Shizun has a stern face but is actually kind-hearted. I am not as gifted as others, but he never thinks I am dull. Since I am not good with fighting, he teaches me healing techniques instead. He treats me very well. Mo-ran was having fun at the beginning, but when he heard this, he suddenly curtailed his laughter and fell silent. After a while, Mo-ran said, he's not treating you well. He just teaches you some spells and takes care of you once in a while, as any Shizun would do. That's not the same, Shimei retorted. Mo-ran, suddenly upset, puffed out his cheeks and said, he doesn't treat you well. Anyway, I can do all the things he does for you. Shimei then stopped talking. In this embarrassing silence, Mo-ran gradually calmed the fire in his heart. When he saw Shimei look down and became silent, he suddenly felt guilty and whispered, I'm sorry. It's fine. Shimei said. But after a moment, Shimei said again, somewhat abruptly, some years ago, before you came to Shizhong Peak, I was once walking along the road and it suddenly started to rain heavily. I had not yet joined Shizun at that time, and was running under the rain when I met him. He was holding a red oil paper umbrella, and when he saw me in an embarrassing state, he told me to go under his umbrella. I had heard of his cold reputation for a long time, and was so apprehensive as I walked alongside him. And then? Shimei looked gentle and said, and then we didn't talk the whole way. Mo-ran nodded in agreement. He's such a boring person, there's really nothing to say to him. Yes. Shimei smiled up, Shizun talks very little. But when he brought me to the door of the house and I thanked him, I suddenly saw that his right shoulder was soaked, while I had stood on his left all the way and hadn't gotten any rain on me at all. Mo-ran. Shimei continued, the oil paper umbrella was very small, in fact it was only big enough for one person to hold. He used most of it to block the rain for me. Then, I watched him walk away in the rain. When I got back to the house, I wrote the obeisance and begged him to take me under his tutelage. Stop it. Mo-ran suddenly said, you're so kind-hearted that if you go on, I'll feel sorry for you. Shimei said in a gentle voice, Ran, don't you think Shizun is pitiful? He only has such a small umbrella because he always walks alone and no one wants to accompany him. So, if sometimes Shizun treats me more harshly or reprimands me more, I don't care. Because I remember his soaked shoulders. Mo-ran doesn't say anything, but the tip of his nose is slightly red, and a trace of sorrow flickered in his heart. The feeling of sorrow and grief was a bit vague, and suddenly it wasn't clear who exactly the feeling was for. Shimei, Ran, let me ask you a question. Ran, go on. Shimei, do you particularly hate Shizun? Ran was stunned. Shimei, or rather, you don't like him. When Shimei asked these questions, his gaze, which had always been calm and soft, seemed a little sharp for some reason. Ran, who was unprepared for this, was suddenly speechless under such a piercing look. Ran smothered his head, neither nodding nor shaking it, and only after a long while did he force a smile and said, "Oh, wasn't I the one asking the questions? I actually got sidetracked by you accidentally. It shouldn't be like that." Seeing that he avoided talking about it, Shimei, who was considerate, did not force the issue and only smiled. "I just asked it casually, you don't have to take it to heart." Ran picks up his mood and then raises his eyes to look through the curtain of deep lashes at Shimei's pretty face, which is as bright as the moon. Originally, his third question was to ask Shimei whether he liked him or not. But after this conversation, the mood suddenly became heavy, and he was silent for a while before pursing his lips. Ran suddenly said, "He is Shizun, but he's just our Shizun, so there's nothing to like or dislike." At his words, Chu Wanning, who is standing in the shadows, twitched his eyelashes like the rustling of a butterfly's wings when it was injured. "There are things that are clear in my mind, but when I really confirm them, I feel like I am drifting and my heart is sinking into the sea." Perhaps it is because autumn has come a little early that Chu Wanning suddenly feels a little cold. Ran and Shimei were still talking in the distance. Chu Wanning closed his eyes. The slight nausea that had been welling up from time to time started again. Suddenly feeling exhausted, he turned to leave. But within a few steps, Ran's voice was carried by the autumn breeze, as if directly to his ears. It made him stop in his tracks. Ran was asking Shimei a third question. "All right, you've talked about Xuemeng, and you've talked about Shizun, so tell me about me." He tried to keep the concern in his voice to a minimum and asked carefully, even somewhat humbly. "Shimei, what do you think of me?" Shimei seemed to be startled by the question and stopped talking suddenly. Like Tianwen, Jiangui obviously has the ability to coax honest answer. Shimei resisted answering, and Jiangui glows redder and redder because of this and tightened on Shimei's fingertips. Shimei frowned and said, "It hurts. I only ask you to say one thing." Ran couldn't bear to hurt Shimei, but this question was deeply buried in his heart in the past and at present. He felt like he has become a demon as he insisted on asking Shimei, "What do you think of me?" Shimei shook his head and closed his eyes. It seemed that the pain was terrible and his long slender eyelashes trembled uncontrollably and a fine line of sweat gradually seeped from his forehead. Seeing him like this, Ran's heart softened and he sighed, "It's just." He was about to withdraw Jiangui when Shimei couldn't tolerate it any longer and answered. With his face as white as gold paper, he said hoarsely, "I think you are very good." Ran's eyes widened suddenly. After Shimei said this, his face, which had been pale, quickly reddened and seemed annoyed. His eyes dropping as he dared not look at Ran. Jiangui turned into a little red light, like the petals of a residual flower, and moved back to Ran's palm. Ran did not hold back, lowered his head, and gave a light smile. When he looked up at Shimei, his eyebrows and eyes were curled. "It's all the rippling meaning of spring." There was a lazy smile in his voice, but his eyes were a little moist as he said, "Oh, thank you. I think you're very nice too. I've told you all about it in Jinchinj Lake, but you didn't even remember it. So, I want to say it again, you're very likable." Although he did not specify on what kind of like, Shimei's neck was still red and he could not say a word. Ran stared at him with a pair of dark and lacquered eyes. The luster In his eyes is so clear, as if they are stars that are immersed in the sea and fine waves are surging into the Milky Way. I want to treat you well and make you happy. Shimei is not stupid. He knows what he wants by his expression and can't help but lower his head. Moran couldn't help but raise his hand to touch Shimei's temples. But before he could get close enough, there was a flash of golden light and a solid snap of a whip firmly struck Moran's face. Ah! Moran turned back in shock at the pain. He saw Chu Wanning, dressed in white, standing by the white wall of the green eaves with his hands in the air, looking down at them coldly. Tianwen hissed like a spiritual snake, coiling on the ground, willow leaves rustling, bursting out a cluster of sparks, a ray of golden light from time to time. Shimei exclaimed, Shizun. Moran covered his face and said, Shizun. So, what if you're hated, so what if you're not liked? Anyone else might have cried but Chu Wanning crying ridiculous tears. Absurd. He rather beat up the moron one who had no eyes. Chu Wanning's expression was extremely frigid as he walked up and said, Why are you not training properly? What are you chatting about here? Mo Weiyu, do you think after getting the last holy weapon you will be a sure winner? That no one can beat you? Shizun, I just want. Chu Wanning has a fierce look in his eyes and so Moran has to shut up. Shi Mingjing, come with me to spar. Mo Weiyu, he paused, disgusted, go practice, and if you can't get 10 moves under me when I come to spar with you, go back to your own house and be punished by copying the Qing Xianju 300 times. Now move. 10 strokes. Moran thought it would be better for him to go straight to copying the Qing Xianju. End chapter. Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 51. This venerable one's Shizun. Pfft. Hahaha. For the next 3 days, Chu Wanning was even more sullen than usual, his temper even worse. Resentment was written clearly all over Yuhang Elder's features, and a haze of miasma followed wherever he went. The disciples scattered like prey animals at the mere sight of him. Even Xue Zhenyang dared not talk to him too much for fear of his murderous aura. Chu Wanning didn't want to admit that he had any untoward feelings for Moran, but seeing his 2 disciples rendezvousing by the training dummies and acting so affectionate, he simply couldn't help the rage that flared up and the sour feeling that flooded his chest. He felt disgusted. Not just at others, but more so at himself. He and Mo Weiyu were master and disciple, nothing more. How was it any of his business whom Moran liked to stick to, whom he wanted to be involved with? What right did he have to wave his willow vine around just because he didn't like what he saw? If he liked someone, liked being near someone, what's that got to do with you? Did it inconvenience you in any way? Chu Wanning, how are you this pathetically petty? Anyway, backing up 1,000 steps, so what if he felt unspeakable longing toward Moran? He had his pride and plenty of self-restraint, more than enough to keep his feelings under control, more than enough to suppress that terrifying longing for however long it takes to suffocate it. No one will ever know of this unsightly affection of his. Nothing will remain but the brocade pouch with the 2 locks of hair inside. Moran won't know about his feelings, just like he will never know that, at the bottom of Jinjinj Lake, the one who endured searing agony to save him wasn't Shimei, but himself. But what is this feeling? Is it jealousy? The mere thought made Chu Wanning choke. For months after that, he tried to avoid Moran as much as possible, minimizing all interactions outside of the routine instructions in cultivation and training. Time flew by, and it was nearly the end of the year before anyone knew it. One day, as Chu Wanning was returning from a trip down the mountain to suppress monsters, it started snowing just as he got to the front gates. Shizun Peak quickly became covered in a veil of silver. Chu Wanning was no good with the cold, tugging his robes closer for warmth, he walked briskly toward Loyalty Hall. A hearty fire warmed the inside of the hall, firewood crackling inside the copper basin. Chu Wanning came to report in with Xue Zhenyang, but the sect master was nowhere to be seen. Instead, he bumped into Mo Ran. There was no one else at Loyalty Hall. This was the first time Chu Wanning had been alone with him in many months, and he couldn't help feeling a little awkward. What's more, this was where that absurd dream took place. Speaking of which, Chu Wanning actually had that dream several more times afterwards, clear and vivid each time. He tried to struggle the first few times, but got used to it after a while and just let the Mo Ran in the dream run his mouth like a lunatic, while he idly counted Mo Ran's eyelashes out of pure boredom, 1, 2, 3. But that dream always ended up abruptly at a certain critical moment. After many repeats of the same, Chu Zongxi decided that it must be due to his innately pure and noble disposition, that even fantasies didn't get too overly sordid. Having come to such a conclusion, Yu Heng Elder and his fragile glass maiden heart finally managed to retrieve a bit of dignity. But the combination of Mo Ran and Loyalty Hall still gave Chu Wanning an intuitive sense of danger. Unfortunately, that young man hadn't the slightest idea about any of this. Seeing him, Mo Ran's face lit up in a toothy smile. "Shizun, you're back. MN. Are you looking for Uncle? Aunt's feeling a little under the weather, so he's been over there taking care of her. What did you need? I'll let him know." Chu Wanning pressed his lips together and said mildly, "No need." Then immediately turned to leave. But Mo Ran called out to him, "Shizun, please wait." "What is it?" He turned to look back as he spoke, but was unexpectedly met with Mo Ran's extended hand brushing against his brow. Mo Ran brushed a few times, saying like it was the most natural thing in the world, "Look at you, you're covered in snow." Chu Wanning froze. At a loss for what to do, he stood frozen as the young man uttered fussily while dusting the snow off him, then took out a white handkerchief to dry his hair. Chu Wanning was no good with the cold. He couldn't be exposed to the cold, or he'll easily fall sick. But this person never knew how to take care of himself. In the previous life, after he was imprisoned, he often liked to sit in the courtyard and watch the koi fish in the pond, unheeding even when it began to snow. So he caught colds and ran fevers all the time. Shizun was even more frail after his spiritual core was destroyed. He would be bedridden for at least half a month every time he got sick, and bowl after bowl of medicinal concoction had practically no effect. And so, when Mo Ran saw him covered in snow, half of them melted and the other half still frozen, he reflexively started brushing the snow off of him. But halfway through drying his hair, he belatedly realized that his actions might have been a little too intimate. His head snapped up just in time to come face to face with a pair of reticent phoenix eyes. Chu Wanning was glaring at him. Mo Ran's hands withdrew sheepishly. "Ahahaha, this disciple overstepped his bounds. Shizun can dry himself off, of course." Chu Wanning was quite relieved that he backed off. That dream was just a dream, after all. His disciple was still the same as before, nothing like that man in his dream who referred to himself as this Venerable One. Chu Wanning was silent for a while before taking the proffered handkerchief from Mo Ran. He took off his cape and walked over to the fire to warm his hands, then wiped off the melting snow on his hair. "Since when did you finally learn what boundaries were?" Face lit by the warm light of the fire, he glanced sideways at Mo Ran through narrowed eyes. "Haven't you always been oblivious to such things?" Mo Ran neither spoke for a moment. Chu Wanning finished drying his hair and absent-mindedly tucked the handkerchief away, then shot an impassive glance at Mo Ran. "Anyway, what are you doing here?" Mo Ran hurriedly replied, "It's the end of the year. There's a year's worth of files that need to be organized, so I'm helping." Chu Wanning cut him off. "I know the files need to be organized, but isn't that Shi Mingjing's job? Why are you doing it?" Mo Ran, "Shizun's memory is truly very impressive." Chu Wanning was totally unmoved by the flattery. "Where is he?" "He said he was a little feverish and have headache this morning." Seeing the look in Chu Wanning's eyes, Mo Ran hurriedly continued, "Sorry, Shizun, I was the one who told him to get some rest, so please don't blame him. Such obvious cover-up was like a sharp needle that pricked Chu Wanning and made his brows draw together. He was quiet for a while, then asked, "Is he all right?" Seeing that he didn't lay blame, Moran let out a breath of relief. "I gave him medicine and waited for him to fall asleep before leaving earlier. He just caught a cold. He should be fine in 2 or 3 days." "Thank you for the concern, Shizun." "Who said I'm concerned about you lot? I was just asking." Moran. "I'll leave you to your organizing, then." Chu Wanning left. Shizun Peak forbid its disciples from doing each other's duties. Moran thought he was going to be punished by Shizun for sure, but Chu Wanning had unexpectedly let him off this easily. He stood in place dumbstruck for quite a while, and didn't react until Chu Wanning was already a distance away. Moran picked up the umbrella leaning against the door and ran after the lone figure in the snow. "Shizun!" he called. "Shizun, wait." Chu Wanning turned around. Moran came to a stop in front of him, shook the snow off the umbrella, and opened it above the two of them. "The snow's really coming down, take the umbrella with you." Chu Wanning shot a glance at him. "No need." Moran tried to hand the umbrella over, but Chu Wanning felt only irritation and refused to accept it. The umbrella fell in the back and forth struggle right as a wind picked up, and was blown several feet away. Chu Wanning stared at that umbrella that had seemed to be planted in the snow. He stared for a while. This was such a small issue, he wanted to just turn and leave indifferently as he always had in the past. But his feet refused to move. Just like how a candle will always go out in the end, and even an ancient well will dry up in time. Even the most tolerant person will eventually break down. Chu Wanning turned with a sweep of a sleeve and said angrily, "Mo Weiyu, can you just stop messing with me? I'm not Shi Mingjing, I don't need someone else to take care of me." A golden light gathered in his hand as he spoke, and Moran reflexively took a step backwards, thinking he was going to summon Tianwen for a whipping again. But instead, the light rose into the sky like a gushing spring of gold and formed into a resplendent barrier, blocking snow and wind alike. Moran. "Oh, a barrier for blocking rain and snow." Chu Wanning's expression was frigid, his brows even. "Do I look like I need an umbrella?" He seemed to be truly angry, the barrier rapidly changing colors with the movement of his fingertips, from gold to red, to purple, blue, and then green. The effect of the barrier changed with the color, one warded only against snow, one blocked the wind as well, and another even kept the inside of the barrier warm despite the freezing snowstorm. These techniques were quite powerful, and Chu Wanning normally wouldn't waste his spiritual energy to block the snow this way. Such a sulkily showy display was so childish that Moran was rendered completely speechless for a moment. "Shizun, don't be angry." "Who said I'm angry?" Chu Wanning's face was pale from anger. "Get lost already." All right. I'm getting lost." Moran glanced at the barrier. "Don't waste your energy like that though. Get lost." With a wave of Chu Wanning's hand, the spiritual energy forming the barrier suddenly gathered instead into a strike of lightning that landed right in front of Moran. Moran was just showing him some concern out of the kindness of his heart but nearly got struck by lightning for it. He felt a bit resentful and was just about to say something, but when he looked up, he saw Chu Wanning standing in the snow, face pale to match, but the rims of his eyes were a little red. Moran, startled, You and I are merely master and disciple, nothing more than that. There's no need for any unnecessary concern between us. So take your umbrella and get lost." Moran started, understanding suddenly dawning on him. "Shizun, that day at the practice field, when I was talking with Shimei, did you hear?" But Chu Wanning said nothing, only turned to leave. Moran didn't call out to him this time, and he didn't turn to look back. A little ways away, Chu Wanning sneezed. His steps faltered, then he put his head down and walked even faster, as if he was angry, but also as if he was running away. Moran stood in the snow the entire time, staring numbly at his back until he disappeared, lost in thought. Chu Wanning fell sick as soon as he got back to the Red Lotus Pavilion. He could use barriers to ward off rain and snow, but he never bothered to when it came to himself, seeing it as a waste of spiritual energy. That's why, when it rained, he just used an oil paper umbrella like any other ordinary person. He sneezed a whole bunch, and the headache and fever were quick to follow as well. He was already used to healing himself from all the times he got sick, and a little cold was nothing to even bat an eye at, so he took some medicine, washed up and changed his clothes, then burrowed into bed to sleep it off. Maybe it was due to the cold, but the nausea that had been cropping up ever since he got injured at Jinchinj Lake was particularly bad this night. The night went by in a hazy sleep, his entire body drenched in a cold sweat, but he felt as if he was burning like a furnace. Chu Wanning didn't wake up until noon the next day. Blinking his eyes blearily open, he lay there spacing out for a while before slowly getting out of bed to put on shoes. He paused and stared. His boots seemed to have become quite a bit bigger overnight. He looked more carefully. Chu Wanning. Even Yuhang Elder's composure couldn't handle this kind of shock. It wasn't that his boots had become bigger. End chapter.